Hello, everyone. I am Tish Palmadesi. I am a marketing specialist with the Department of Fish and Wildlife here in California. And part of my role is being part of the Recruit, Retain, Reactivate team, R3, Recruit, Retain, Reactivate. And we work to bring more Californians to hunting, fishing, foraging, shooting sports, and just really getting outdoors and respecting all of the resources that California has. These Harvest Huddle Hours, Harvest Huddle Hour H3, are a virtual program that we use to connect with people all across the state and offer those resources to help build confidence and get you, our huddlers, more comfortable with the sport that you're most interested in. Speaking of what you're most interested in, we're going to take a look at the chat. Got some people from Madeira. Hello. We got some from Lodi. And thank you guys for joining us. They're just getting started. Ridgecrest, hello. Thank you for joining us. We have an exciting huddle today. Again, it's an intro to archery, a trip to the archery store, what to expect, what to ask, testing bows, draw length, and weight. We have a very knowledgeable panelist today. And before I introduce him, I want to remind everyone that our Recruit, Retain, Reactivate Harvest Huddle Hours, R3H3s, are recorded, including this one. So if you hear something you like and you want to share it with someone in a few days, this episode will be available on our department's R3 webpage. Again, I put that link at the top of the chat. It's wildlife.ca.gov/R3. What you're going to do once you're there is scroll down to the California Wild Kitchen tab, and you'll see a link for all of our Harvest Huddle Hours. All right, so before we get started, some real quick housekeeping. If you're new to the Zoom webinar platform, you can change the way your screen looks by clicking the top right icons. There are two views, gallery and presenter. Feel free to play around with it. What you select isn't going to affect all of our screens, so you just make it the way you want, and that's going to make you the most happy for the next hour. At the end of this session, there is going to be an opportunity for audience participation through Q&A. In fact, we're counting on it, and how we're going to interact with you there is through the Q&A feature, and that's located at the bottom of your screen. It's the icon that looks like two little text bubbles. Click that to open a dialog box, and then you type in your question, hit submit. I'm going to be getting through as many questions as I can behind the scenes while our presenter is presenting. However, I might save some questions for the live Q&A portion. So if you don't hear it answer, if I don't answer it right away, just know I might be saving it so that the whole group can hear your question. If for some reason a question that you ask is kind of outside the scope of what we are talking about today, again, feel free to email us at R3 statewide program at wildlife.ca.gov. I put that in the chat as well. I'll throw it in there a few times, just if you guys have questions outside of archery or anything that Devin talks about, I can get the information for you later on. Now for our presenter, Devin O'D is the California chapter coordinator for Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, which is a nonprofit sportsman organization. After getting a degree in political science from UC Santa Barbara, Devin worked in the environmental consulting industry as a marketing manager and even started his own business, but the allure of the backcountry and love for wild places brought him to his current role at BHA, where he dedicates his time to wild public lands, waters, and wildlife. He's coming to us today from San Diego, California, and is an avid archer. He first picked up a bow when he was 5, but as an adult, he's been using a bow for about the last decade. He says his favorite part of the sport is understanding the intersection between the physics of tuning bows and the pursuit of perfect repetition through thousands of arrows shot. I'm going to let him explain that to us a little bit later. But Devin, thank you so much for being here. We're excited to have you and learning from you. Please take it away.
Thank you so much, Tish. It's great to be here, and thanks for hosting the R3H3 program and for all that you guys do to support getting folks into the field and improving skills and just covering all of the really rad topics that you guys do. So without any further ado, thank you again for the introduction. I'll just kind of jump into the slideshow here. This is just kind of my intro slide. I've got a quote from Fred Bear. If you don't know who Fred Bear is, he's a really pretty legendary figure in the hunting community, especially the traditional hunting community. And I've got a couple quotes from him throughout the presentation here, but great individual and great conservation ethic there. So good person to look up at a later date. But this one's, to me, really resonates. Nothing clears a troubled mind better than shooting a bow. And that's just so true. And archery's being able to shoot and target shoot and retrieve your ammunition is one of the greatest things about archery, because once you make that investment, you can go to the range and shoot your half dozen arrows over and over and over, as long as you hit the target and you don't hit the same spot and Robin Hood one of your arrows. So yeah, that's my intro. This is just a little picture here. You might recognize the pronghorn antelope with this guy on the wall. So I was very fortunate to get to harvest that with my bow last year. That was actually on a trip with my wife and our 3-month-old daughter. We drove to Wyoming, and we both harvested pronghorn antelopes with our bows. So really cool adventure. There's so much opportunity that comes with hunting, and especially bow hunting and just archery as a practice and as a pursuit. So looking forward to diving into some specifics here. And here's just a little bit of just kind of an agenda for today. Just give you a brief introduction into who I am, a little bit about Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, the organization, and then we'll talk about bow hunting. Hunting's hard enough as it is. Why make it harder? But there's some pros and cons there for sure, and there's a lot of reasons why we do it. We'll talk about different bows, so compound versus traditional archery equipment. We'll talk about draw length and form, eye dominance, and how that plays into if you want to shoot right-handed or left-handed. And then price points, new equipment versus used equipment. I saw in the chat right off the bat, mention of like, oh, I'm thinking about upgrading my bow. How long has it been? When's the time to buy a new bow? And we can try to dive into that a little bit too, because that's a great question. And I think something that every archer sort of mulls over every year, like, oh, is this the year that I'm going to get a new bow? Do I need one? So we can talk about all that. And then of course, arrow setups, that's something I could talk about all day. So you guys will have to rein me in potentially when we get there. But prior to working for BHA, I was the marketing manager for Victory Archery. And I can talk about arrows all day. So we'll cover a lot of stuff there. And then last is just, a brief conversation on ethics, practice, patience, what it means to go out there in the field and take a shot, and making sure that you're taking ethical shots and everything that goes into that. And just, really the ethos of bow hunting and archery and everything. So again, if you guys have questions along the way, feel free to throw them in the chat, and I might answer them if we're on that subject, or if not, we can cross that at the end. So thanks everyone for attending, and thanks again, Tish, for putting this together. Okay, so again, Devin O'D, California Chapter Coordinator for Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. We're a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to wild public lands, waters, and wildlife. BHA is a North American organization. We have chapters in 48 states, 2 Canadian provinces, 1 territory. We've got close to 40,000 members, a ton of supporters all across the continent, and we work on behalf of wild public lands and waters and habitat, and we do stewardship projects. We advocate for public access, legislation that's going to support hunting and angling, and ethical hunting, and the pursuit of wild game and fish in the state. So really, really cool organization. If you haven't heard of us, definitely check it out, and feel free to shoot me a message anytime if you want to learn more or get involved in California. That's what I oversee, is our efforts here in the state. This is a picture of me shooting in San Diego. It's where I live. This is at a public 3D archery range called Balboa Park. And I'm doing daddy duty here with my daughter on my back. And it's good training for hunting season. And it's also, makes you really focus when she starts wiggling and kicking. But it's just fun to get to do that with her. And I'm very fortunate to live close to a range, public range, $2 to to shoot, managed by the San Diego Archers, all volunteer led. And there's really a ton of public ranges all throughout California. So I encourage you to check that out. Local clubs are a great resource. They put on shoots, and great way to get into it and get connected with the community there. So bow hunting, archery, hunting in general, you know, why make it harder? Hunting is really challenging. I mean, especially depending on where you are. If you're public land hunter, and if you're like myself in Southern California, it seems darn near impossible some years to harvest a deer. But there's a reason why a lot of people bow hunt, and you know, one of the advantages right off the bat is you get first crack. You get an earlier season. It's not always a great thing with heat and fires, and you know, just you're not hunting during the rut often, and there's a lot, you know, the ground's so crunchy it's hard to even get close. So you know, that advantage comes with its own disadvantages. The nice thing about archery is, you know, oftentimes when you, I've personally experienced this, when you shoot an animal, that there's just like there's a moment afterwards that oftentimes with the broadheads as sharp as they are today, and if you get a well-positioned shot, a clean pass-through shot, a lot of times the animal doesn't really fully understand what's happened. And I even, on that antelope hunt, we had 2 tags. We had a buck and a doe tag. And the doe that I shot actually went about 20 yards after I shot her as a double lung, and then went back to feeding for about 10 seconds and then just keeled over. So there's just something special about bow hunting. And I think once you get into it, you start to understand a little bit more about the draw there, and what it means to get close, and to really blend into the environment, and to get to a point where you're so dialed in as far as your scent, and you know, it being quiet. And if you're tree stand hunting, you're up in the tree before the forest wakes up, and it's magical. I highly recommend it if you ever have never sat in a tree stand. It's a great experience. And you know, ground blind can be the same, or even just making your own blind is also just kind of similar experience. Just getting to a point where you're really blending into the environment, and then you see wildlife start to come out that you would not notice if you were glass and spotting and walking through and trying to bump something out. So, you know, tree stand, ground blind, spot and stock. It depends on where you're hunting. There's a lot to unpack there, and they're all really effective. I do all 3. A lot of that just comes to where you're hunting. And so we won't get into that too much, but if you guys have questions, feel free to shoot those and we can talk about it in the end. Effective range is a really, really big thing for archery, for hunting in general. It's just more, it's probably amplified when you're bow hunting, because there's a greater variability there. I mean, you could probably make that argument for rifle hunting as well, but essentially, you know, with archery, there's just a ton of practice that needs to go into it to be an ethical hunter, and to really understand how your arrows are flying, your equipment, how your broadheads are tuned. There's so many dimensions. And so understanding your effective range is what I stress. Like, there's not a range that's ethical or not ethical. It's about where you are in that journey and your particular skill. So, you know, a lot of people don't shoot past 20, 30 yards because that's what they're comfortable doing. And especially if you're hunting in a really dense environment. You know, back east, I've done some whitetail hunts. This guy behind me was one that my wife shot in upstate New York. And, you know, a lot of those areas that we're hunting, they're like swamplands that, you know, you can't even see past 20 yards. So that conversation is somewhat irrelevant. But out here in the West, it can be, you know, oftentimes you can see deer 100, 200 yards away. And so then it becomes, you know, what's my effective range? How do I close the distance? Do I try to bring them in? All those different questions. And so, you know, shooting your bow, going to 3D archery tournaments and shoots, practicing from all different scenarios, practicing sitting, standing, kneeling, from a tree stand, from a ground blind. Just the more time that you can spend shooting your bow in various situations and understanding your range, and where you're lethal, where you have a good group that you're confident in, that's got to guide your hunting and the choices that you make in the field. So really can't stress that enough, but that's a personal thing that just every person has to figure out on their own. Understanding shot placement and angles is definitely a little different with archery than it is rifle hunting, in some regards, in some contexts. So there's, I've just got like a little diagram here that shows, many people, this is sort of commonplace, maybe people it's not, but you've got your broadside shot and then quartering away and quartering to, and with arrows, you have to be more careful with shoulder blades, maybe than you would with a rifle, and you may be aiming a little bit differently depending on your setup. There's certain people that do like to shoot a really heavy arrow and a really, really stout heavy arrow, and they are kind of aiming for the shoulder. It's not something that I personally do. I do like shooting a heavy arrow, but if at all possible, I'm going to try to avoid that shoulder, to hopefully get a pass-through shot, and to ensure a really good blood trail and a good likelihood of recovering that animal. And again, that's my personal approach, and there's not necessarily a right or wrong way to do it, but there are certainly good shots and bad shots. And would encourage everyone to understand their equipment, and figure out how they're going to approach that, and to encourage people to take only those ethical shots that they have a great likelihood of taking the animal and being able to recover it quickly. Another thing on that you can't see in this diagram is like your angle. So if you're in a tree stand, you want to compensate as well for where that arrow is going to enter and exit. So there's a lot that goes into that. And again, that's just practice, right? That's being comfortable with your equipment. All right, so let's start with the basics here. We're gonna start with compound bows. I've got two bows here. No, these are bare bows. They're just pictures that I found online. So these do not have all the bells and whistles that your bow setup would have. This is likely how you'd see it hanging in a store, how you may buy it, and then you have to add your arrow rest and sights and stabilizers and quivers and everything. So one of the major differences right off the bat is shooting with a mechanical release versus shooting with your fingers. So mechanical release, like this right here, you can see in the diagram, it's just a trigger that's going to clip onto the string, and then you're going to put your finger on the trigger, and as you pull through, it's going to cause the bow to fire. That would be the smaller bow here. Is traditionally something that's going to be shot with a mechanical release aid, because it has a shorter axle to axle. So if you're the axle to axle, that's a measurement of the limbs between the cam. So the cam is that circular component. The limbs are going across, connecting to the cam, which connects the riser, which is really, really solid, stiff component of the bow. And the measurement of bows axle to axle is that distance between your limbs essentially in the center of your cam. So most of your modern compound bows that are designed to be shot with a release aid will be in that 28 to 35 inch range. 35 and up is going to be more traditionally shot with fingers, although you can do both. But when you get the string back, when you pull back, when a shorter axle to axle, you'll notice that the angle of the string becomes very acute, and it'll pinch your fingers if you try to use a modern compound with a short axle to axle. So you see the bow on the right, that's got a much longer axle to axle, meaning a greater angle for the string, which is going to allow you to shoot that with fingers more comfortably. So a bunch of different type of release aids. This one's designed to be shot and anchored here with your finger on the trigger. There's, I've got another style here. There's really a lot. This one's designed to be shot with your pinky, or I'm sorry, your ring finger. So there's a lot of different things out there. It's really good to just practice with them. Each one has their own kind of anchor point and nuance to it. So whatever you choose, you want to be consistent. That's really the name of the game with archery, is consistency and repetition. So this is traditional equipment. And I've got three, general styles here. The one on the right is a recurve bow. The one just next to it to the left there is a takedown recurve bow. So you see the limbs are not attached to this bow. The takedown recurve bow has some advantages because, especially for a newer archer looking to get into traditional archery, is that you can start out at a low limb and work your way up. If you start shooting a bow that's the draw weight's too hard, you might just not be able to pull it back, or you might just develop really poor form because you're struggling to get that bow back. And you want to lay a really solid foundation with proper form that's going to teach you the correct way to shoot, that's going to allow you to build into that heavier draw weight. So takedowns have their advantages in that regard because you can buy the limbs, you don't have to replace the entire bow. But they can also still be quite expensive depending on where you're going there. The third bow that's listed here is a long bow. And so you'll notice the difference between the recurve. Obviously, the long bow is just straight when it's unstrung, and the recurve has some curvature to it. So I personally I haven't done any big game hunting with traditional archery equipment. I've done some small game and some bow fishing and things of that nature. So I'm not the most educated in that regard. I mean, I do love shooting my recurve, and I can talk about it a little bit for those that are interested. But as far as from a hunting perspective, shooting a compound is challenging enough for me. So adding, and especially in Southern California, trying to get an opportunity with a traditional bow, I commend those that are able to do it. And I think it's another layer of difficulty, certainly. And again, just being able to understand your effective range there with that equipment is really important. So kind of going quickly through everything, just in the interest of time. And I'd be happy to circle back to any of these subjects if you guys have questions. So now we're talking about quivers. There's two kind of general quivers here. The one on the top right is a compound bow quiver, and it's designed to be removed from the bow. And then below it is a hip quiver, and then they also make fat quivers, which is kind of like your Robin Hood style that most people sort of associate with archery off the bat. So the latter two are not as commonly used in a hunting setup. They're pretty loud and still can be done, but there's less people that do that. There are quivers that can attach to traditional archery equipment as well. And then there's some quivers. I got my bow here as a prop, so I can show you guys just some things, and I can always jump out of the screen sharing mode if we need to look at anything closer. But this is my quiver here. This is actually not designed to be removed from the bow. I have two quivers I switch back and forth. One of them is a quick disconnect, so I can just actually take it off the bow. This one is actually fixed mounted. And I go back and forth, but I do like this one. It seems to reduce the vibration a little bit. So it just makes it a little quieter having it mounted solidly on the bow. But that's not to say that you can't achieve the same thing with a quick disconnect quiver. It's just each one has its own pluses and minuses. So yeah, that's quivers. I don't know if we need to cover anything else there. Sights. A lot of people shooting traditional archery aren't going to use a sight. They're just going to aim down the arrow using the bowstring to line that up with the arrow shaft, and then either the point of the arrow or potentially using their fingers or a finger tab to judge how far down they're pulling down the string, and that's called string walking. And that's a whole another animal that I certainly can't get into today, but really cool, interesting technique. There's also folks that will change their anchor point on their face, and we'll talk about anchor points and how that can work. So there's a lot of different ways to aim. Personally, I've got what's called a multi-pin sight on my bow. So it's like the one in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. It's got 5 fixed pins, and those, for me, I have that marked out at 20 to 60 yards. So each one in 10-yard increments. And the big difference between a a single pin and a multi-pin sight, if you're trying to figure out advantages and disadvantages at a bow shop, you'll see in the multi-pin sight in the top right-hand corner, there isn't that, there isn't the variation for yardage. So instead, there's a wheel and a guide, and you actually turn the sight. And so you just have one point of aim always in the center of the sight, which has a lot of advantages for accuracy and just not being distracted. However, you do need to adjust that sight every time you want to change yardages. So the advantage, some accuracy improvements, potentially having just one pin to look at. Disadvantage is, let's say you're hunting, you range an animal, it's 40 yards, you come to full draw, the animal keeps moving. By the time it presents you with a shot, it's now moved 10 yards plus or minus whatever direction. And if you don't do a good job evaluating the distance with that single pin sight, you're going to have to just manually adjust that at full draw and guess where you should aim higher or lower on the animal, or let down and change your sight. With a multi-pin sight, you can say, oh, it looks like he went another 10 yards, so I'm going to use the next pin. I'm going to use the 50 yard, or I'm going to use the 30 yard pin. So that can be a huge advantage. That's why personally I like a multi-pin sight, but there's a ton of people that hunt with a single pin sight and they do really well as well. So just kind of different options for different people. There's a couple kind of hybrid sights that are like a multi-pin, but with a step down. So those are kind of an interesting option as well. And then there's some new technology out there that's got like a laser rangefinder built into the sight, which is really high tech. I'm not sure about regulations on that, if there are any. So something to look into when you're looking at equipment, but those are pretty sweet because then you can just click the button and see exactly where the animal is. And as it moves, it's going to automatically adjust where to put that pin for you. So huge advantage. You know, again, I'm not personally, I like the challenge and the balance and where it's at with that multi-pin sight. So that's where I've stayed, but a lot of different options there. Stabilizers. So we've got a bunch of different options there. As you can see, there's kind of two general ones that I put up on the screen. The first one, the top one's kind of like this. This is a, you know, more of a hunting style stabilizer. It's short. It's got weight on the end of it, and it's going to give you an advantage there as far as like mobility wise. If you're in a tree stand, if you're spot and stalking, if you're walking around, you can you're not going to be knocking into brush or limbs or making noise. So it's more compact. The goal of the stabilizer is to balance the bow when you have it at full draw. So when you're holding the bow out, this, and I'll just really quickly stop sharing for a second so you guys can see. All right, so can you guys all see that on a larger screen now? Let me, looks like it might be on.
We see it good, Devin.
Okay, cool. So when you've got the bow out, you can see the stabilizers in front. That's going to help you hold the bow stable, and it's going to give you a really good platform to aim so that you're not, you know, kind of doing one of these as you're trying to center on your target. A target stabilizer is going to be much longer. It's going to improve the balance of the bow, but it's going to be impractical to hunt with. Some people will use what's called a sidebar stabilizer as well. This is something that I use when I'm shooting my bow like in a tournament. So like Vegas, they do like money shoots and things like that. Oftentimes I'll use this because it's an added stabilization. You get front and back. But for hunting, I don't usually. It kind of takes away, and it can be more of a distraction, and it can get loose, and then you're really gonna be in trouble if that thing gets loose because your whole setup's gonna be off. So just as far as like understanding your equipment, any change to your bow, anything that you modify, different release, different stabilizer, different arrows, different sight, whatever it is, like it's going to change your your point of impact, it's going to have an effect on how that arrow flies. So consistency is like, you'll hear people all the time harping on consistency, and that's just absolutely the most important thing when it comes to hunting season. It's like, just once your bow's dialed, just do not touch it. Make sure that, you know, there's no sticks in your cams, or make sure that everything looks the same and there's no issues, but don't make big changes during hunting season unless you have to. It's usually going to throw you off, and yeah, just not recommended usually. So talk about draw length and anchor points. You can calculate your draw length using a very crude method, which is basically your wingspan. If you were to measure from your middle finger to middle finger, and then divided by 2.5, but that's not very accurate. It's very much a rough starting point. The best way is to go to a bow shop, test out a bow, and really get a feel for it, because it takes a little while to understand your anchor point, and it depends with different bows and different styles and how you anchor and what release you're using. And so you can see on the screen here, this is one style of how you would anchor shooting a compound bow. And some important takeaways on this, you'll see that he's using the knuckle, and he's putting it behind his ear. That's pretty common for a lot of people. So, and then he's got his finger pretty deep on the trigger, which is good. It's going to allow you to pull through the shot. So that's kind of the first thing when you're figuring out anchor point. You're going to draw the bow back to here, and then you want your arm not to be locked out like that, because you're going to smack your arm and it's going to hurt incredibly bad. You want to turn your wrist a little bit, and we can talk about that for grip. And then you want to have just like a slight bend, just a relaxed, so that the string is going to go through. You're not torquing anything. And then other things that are good to take note of on this are where the string is in orientation to his face. So you can see how it comes. It touches the corner of his mouth, the tip of his nose, and then the peep sight's lined up right with his eye. So that's basically having like 3 points of contact. So you've got your anchor point, you got the string on the corner of your mouth, and the tip of your nose. And that creates a triangle to help you get to the same place every time, so that your arrow is going to, you know, come closer to hitting the same spot every time. So the more you're a machine, the better that arrow is going to fly, and the more consistent you'll be. There's other anchor points. So that's not the only way to do it. If you were shooting a thumb button or this release, some folks will anchor down here on the corner of the jaw, and I've done that a lot too. I really like that. So just, you know, figure out what release you want to try. Probably recommend starting with this style in the beginning, but that will change your draw length a little bit potentially. So just keep that in mind. So we'll talk about traditional anchor points. A lot of different ways to do this. Again, some folks will anchor under the chin and have the string come through the mouth and to the tip of the nose, or will anchor right here at the corner of the mouth using their first finger, or some people will come up and sight right down the arrow with their eye. There's a lot of different ways to do it. The key is just to be consistent. That's the critical component, is whatever you do, you want to be consistent and try to replicate that, so that every time you're shooting, you're going to have that repeatable form, and that you're not going to you know, be adding variables into your shot process. So this is kind of playing into eye dominance. If you're a right-handed shooter, you probably want to be right eye dominant, unless you're the type of person that can shoot with both eyes open, and that your dominant eye is not so dominant that it takes over. But a quick way you can sort of test that is to just make a hole with your fingers and pick an object and look at it, and then close your eyes, close one eye and then close the other eye. And whichever eye is focused on the object, that's going to tell you what your dominant eye is. And it's advantageous to shoot with your dominant eye for the most part, although it's not the end of the world. Again, some folks can do it. But if you're shooting and your dominant eye takes over, and let's say you're left eye dominant and you're shooting with your right hand and the left eye takes over, what happens is you're going to see what's going on in the right part of this diagram, where you're not looking directly down the arrow, you're looking off the arrow, and that's going to dramatically skew your accuracy. and potentially make you miss by like a foot. So eye dominance can be critical. Important to figure that out. And then, yeah, let's kind of talk about a new subject here is new versus used bows. I'm going to go through this a little bit quickly, just looking at the time. First thing is, if you are buying a used bow, make sure it wasn't dry fired. Picture on here is a dry fired bow, and that's when you draw a bow back without an arrow in it and let the string go. And there's so much energy loaded up in the limbs of these bows that anytime they are fired without energy being transmitted through the arrow, that energy has to go somewhere into the system. So it usually goes into the cam strings, limbs, and the string can come off, limbs can break, cams can warp. It's devastating. It can be really dangerous too. So the same thing goes for shooting an arrow that's too light. If there's not enough weight in the arrow, it will basically be like a dry fire because there wasn't enough energy able to be absorbed by the system. So if you're thinking about buying a used bow, get a second opinion, make sure you know what you're looking at, make sure it wasn't dry fired. And then, there's a question of, when do I upgrade my bow? How much do I spend? New or used? New bows come with a warranty. Most companies give a lifetime warranty, which is great. Or a lot of companies do. The budget should be just whatever you've got in your budget. Just be mindful that if you really think you're going to get into it, odds are you're probably going to go higher end at some point. Archery is just one of those things where it's easy to blame the system and not yourself, as one person who's done that many, many times. So, just think about if you're going to be making repeat investments, just making a good one off the bat. But as far as old bows, I shot a 20-year-old bow for a long time when I first got into it. And I bought a new bow maybe 5 or 6 years ago. That's the one I'm currently shooting. And man, I shot that 20-year-old bow better than I did the new bow for about 6 months because I was comfortable with it and I was familiar with it. And it still had more than enough energy to take an animal. So, keep that in mind that there's been a lot of advances. New bows are much quieter. They're more efficient, but they're not so radically different that you can't shoot with an older bow and be successful. You probably want to change the strings. You want to make sure it's tuned. You want to make sure that the limbs and the cams are in good condition, but otherwise you can absolutely shoot an older bow and be incredibly successful. Something to consider on a new bow is the brace height. This is a bow square. It measures the distance between the string and the grip here, the center of the riser. So you'll see brace height listed under specs of a bow. I would recommend for a beginner shooter to target something in the 7-inch range. Don't shoot a 5-inch brace height if you're a new archer. It's going to be really hard to be accurate. That's because the arrow, you're basically holding onto the bow longer. So you have more opportunity to torque the bow. The longer the brace height, the more forgiving the bow is going to be, is a really kind of general understanding of how that works. Usually you're going to get less speed though. So it's a balance. If you have a really short draw length, maybe you want to bump up to a 6-inch brace height or 5.5. But again, remember that you're going to lose some accuracy more than likely as a result of being able to torque the whole system longer while the arrow's in flight. So let's talk about arrows. There's a whole lot of options out there. There's a ton of companies. Each company has a ton of different arrows. There's some arrows that are not too expensive. There's some arrows that are really expensive. As far as buying used arrows, I'm a little bit more hesitant on that because it's harder to find something that's perfectly fit to you. So usually the arrow is going to be cut to your draw length. You're going to dial in a specific weight that works for the animals that you're hunting. And there's a lot of customization there that makes buying used arrows and just a liability of shooting a used arrow that someone maybe, didn't take the best care of, or they've been shooting into the same spot. So there could be some cracks there. You can check your arrows. I'm more than happy to do that. I'll check someone's arrows and draw back and shoot it myself. I'm not saying that, but some more risk there to consider. As far as weight goes, the arrow weight is going to be really critical. The heavier the arrow, really the better it's going to be at the more effective it's going to be in terms of just like pushing through bone. The likelihood of you breaking a shoulder, getting a pass through is going to be greater with a heavier arrow. In almost every circumstance, there's probably some exceptions, but in general, heavy arrow is going to help with that. However, it's going to be moving a lot slower. It's going to give the animal a greater chance to jump the string. There's some disadvantages there too. It's also going to make your pin gapping and your arc of the arrow much higher. So as you're trying to gauge distance at longer distances, the opportunity for you to miss will be greater because you're going to have a larger distance between your pins because the arrow is moving slower and it's got a greater trajectory, a greater arc. So there's also diameter to consider. Micro diameter, small diameter arrows are, have come onto the scene in the last decade, and they're pretty popular. They incorporate oftentimes an outsert, which is going to often aid in the penetration as well. You're basically putting a larger weight on the front end of the arrow and a smaller shaft, which is going to help that arrow to pass through by reducing the friction. Now, outserts can have their own issues, and they can break and they can bend. And they're usually pretty expensive. So there's a lot to consider there. They're certainly not the only way to go. Personally, I've shot micro diameter and arrows with outserts for a very long time, and I'm currently just shooting a standard diameter arrow, which is the one that you saw on the first slide, which are actually an arrow that I helped design when I worked for Victory as a marketing manager. This is an arrow made for BHA as their public landowner series. And, I'm shooting 70 pounds. I've got a 29-inch draw. So by my calculations, I've got enough energy to punch through the animal. I'm not too worried about having a micro. My wife, on the other hand, is shooting 40 pounds or 45. And she really can benefit from that micro diameter shaft because it gives that better penetration. So, she actually got a full pass through on this, 220 some pound buck, and that was shooting 45 pounds, shooting a micro diameter arrow. So there's some great advantages there too. Adding weight and weight up front is also critical. So the more weight that you put in the front of the shaft, that's called the front of center balance. It's where your balance point is on the arrow. There's a lot of really good science and evidence that putting weight up front is going to help with broadhead flight. It's going to improve your overall accuracy, and it's going to improve the penetration and the likelihood that you're going to get a pass-through shot, which will mean entrance, an exit wound, and a better blood trail. So if you're interested in that whole concept, I recommend checking out Dr. Ed Ashby. He's got a ton of information on FOC, and it's pretty interesting stuff, but you can go pretty far down the rabbit hole there. So be warned that you're in for it there. Let's see. I think the next slide, there's also carbon versus wood versus aluminum. There's a lot to unpack on that. And different vein configurations. So if folks want to continue to talk about arrows, I'd be happy to. There's a lot of nuance, but in the interest of time, I'm gonna breeze through it at the moment. Just know that carbon arrows are pretty much the standard these days, with a few hybrid exceptions that are pretty interesting. So I think the next slide is pretty graphic. It's a person that shot an arrow through their hand. So if you don't want to see it, look away. But I want to show you this because there's a lot of risk shooting an arrow that's damaged. So a couple components. If you shoot an arrow that's been cracked, or maybe you hit it, or you broke the nock, or you have a micro crack, or you stepped on it, and you put that into your high energy 330 feet per second compound bow at 70 pounds, and you put all that energy behind the string and the arrow's compromised, it can break. And then especially if that break is at the front of the arrow, your hand's here. So if the arrow breaks on shot, it could basically fragment and go through your hand. It's very rare. It does happen, especially when people aren't paying attention. So always check your arrows. Don't shoot arrows at the same spot if you can avoid it. And if you do, just check them. It's easy. Run your fingernail around the back to make sure there's no cracks. Flex the arrow. Make sure you don't hear any cracks, see any cracks, and you'll be fine. The other part of that is arrow spine. This is a 350. Every arrow is going to have a number on it. make sure that you're shooting the appropriate arrow spine to your setup. And a bow shop will help with that. There's some online arrow calculators out there that can help with that. But essentially, the arrow spine is a rating of stiffness as it relates to the poundage of your bow. So length of the arrow, weight of the arrow point, stiffness of the shaft, and then draw weight of the bow are all playing into this. There's a few other small variables like vanes and wraps and inserts and everything that adds to it. But just know that you really need to shoot the right spine arrow. If you shoot something that's too weak, same thing can happen because it's just going to flex and break. So there's kids arrows, there's adults arrows. They need to be matched to the poundage of the bow. All right, I won't make you look at that any longer. I had to scare you. Okay, so this is kind of like getting to the end. This is another quote from Fred Bear, and I'll read it real quick. It says, when bow hunting, you find you get closer to the woodland critters. The flora and the forest floor becomes clearer. You look at things more closely. You're more aware. You know the limited range of the bow is only 40 yards or so. You must try to outweight that approaching deer. Careful not to make the slightest movement or sound, hoping that your scent won't suddenly waft his way. That's when you'll know for sure and appreciate deeply what bow hunting is all about. And that's just a quote that really resonates with me. Being in a tree before first light, being still, watching and hearing the forest wake up and come to life around you is incredible. Regardless of whether or not you shoot an animal or you see an animal, that's a really, really valuable experience to me. And then when you do blend in and you've got everything dialed and you figured it out in the trail and you've done all the hard work, and then a deer walks in front of your path and you harvest that animal, or whatever you're hunting, it's an incredible sense of accomplishment and just fulfillment. And then sharing that food with your family and friends. There's a real strong appreciation for the animal, for hunting, for the land. And I think that it's personally helped me to instill and to fuel that, kind of smoldering ember inside of that conservation ethic that, really guides why I work for backcountry hunters and anglers, why we advocate for habitat, public lands, wildlife, water quality, wild places, to allow that experience for other people, regardless of who they are, where they come from. All you have to do is buy a tag, pay into the system, and hopefully that my daughter will have the same opportunity one day to do that. And just encourage everyone who's interested in archery that you can't practice enough, you can't spend enough time. But it's so fun. It's a pursuit that's so rewarding. As you shoot your bow, you just get into a rhythm, and for a lot of people, it's a meditation, and it's something that is a really great thing to do with your family and connect with your community, and it'll really take you to a lot of places that you maybe never thought you would go. So I encourage everyone to pick up a bow, whether or not you want to hunt, and just want to thank everyone for attending. Thank Tish, thank CDFW for putting on this program, and I'm more than happy to answer anyone's questions now or later about archery or BHA or any of the work that we're doing in the state.
Devin, that was so great. And we do have quite a few questions for you. I'm going to go ahead and ask, just in case people were asking when you were doing some little prop demonstrations there to see you closer. So let's go ahead and drop the share screen. Yeah, there you go. Just in case some of these questions you want to kind of walk us through anything. Okay, so first one came in right during the introduction. So I want to get to it right away because I think it's a really great question. So this person is interested in starting big game hunting next year. However, the ethics of a clean, quick kill are very important to them. They're under the impression that a gun provides more accurate, quick kill, hence less suffering than possibilities hold with a bow. Do you find this to be true, or do you think bow hunting can provide a cleaner, more efficient kill, and what needs to happen for that to be true? You touched on it a little bit, but I think we could all benefit from maybe just, your opinion on this question.
Yeah, it's the age-old debate, and I don't think I'll say one way or another on that. But I will say that I'm very confident in that archery, when understanding your effective range when done in the context of understanding your shot placement, taking an ethical shot, having your equipment dialed in, using the right equipment, is 100% as lethal as shooting a gun. Now, whether there's a greater possibility of wounding an animal due to circumstances outside of your control, maybe the animal jumps the string because you're too far, or it's too loud, or there are some other additional variables that, maybe one could make the argument that you wouldn't have present with the rifle, but it's something that it's a tradition. It's a history that's, the history of mankind is another Fred Bear quote, I think. And it's something that, we have done for a very long time, and it can be very, very effective. And, personally, I've had a lot of success, and I've been fortunate to not be in the situation of having unfortunate shots, for the most part in my career. So I would say it just comes down to what your effective range is. And if you're 20 yards away from a deer and you're pretty dialed in, I would say it's just as effective as shooting a rifle. And in a lot of ways, as I mentioned with the antelope, just, the deer oftentimes just doesn't even know what happened. The broadhead it's like you cut yourself with a razor blade, and you look and you see blood before you feel pain. And I think sometimes that same thing can sort of happen where the wildlife doesn't really know what happened, sort of looks around, and then you witness this moment afterwards where the animal goes and lays down, and it's just like there's a stillness and there's a connection, and that is something that is not there with shooting a gun. So to me, that's being in that close quarters and having that close connection to harvesting an animal, I think, is part of the archery and the bow hunting experience that is different. And I think it is a very effective means still.
Now, let me get a little personal with you on this. So you've been, bow hunting for, you said at the beginning, when I introduced you, about a decade. When did you feel comfortable enough to, that you have been practicing long enough, that you were efficient in your skill to take that to hunting, like out in the field and actually hunting your first animal? How long did it take you?
That's a great question. So I
shot. A lot of us, or a lot of people that are joining us are beginners or just wanting to get more information to get into it, bow hunting and archery. So, like, how long do you think? I know everyone's different. Everyone learns at different speeds, but maybe just a little bit about you. How long did it take you? Because you seem very proficient and you are expert. So
I don't know about expert. Trying just like everyone, trying to get better. But I shot a bow at like summer camp as a kid, and I had like a little $20 plastic recurve that I shot as a little kid. But I really didn't pick up archery until about 10, 11 years ago, and at that point, I shot and practiced pretty regularly, like with a serious intent of wanting to go hunting, for a full year before I actually ended up purchasing a deer tag and trying. And then it took me about, I think 4 years before I harvested my first animal. So it can take a really long time. It can be like it's really a struggle sometimes. But sometimes that's just where you are. And that was me hunting in Southern California. I went to upstate New York. I've been hunting for 4 years, hadn't shot anything. Then I went to upstate New York and shot 2 deer in a week. So it's like, sometimes it's just like where you are, not necessarily archery.
Okay. So another question we had was, while considering bows, can you touch on the efficiency for lower kinetic energy bows? The used bows or hand-me-downs we see sometimes really aren't the best choice.
Yeah, so that's a great question. There's a few variables there. So what you'll probably come across with bows, let's say if we're talking compound, which I think this question is maybe geared towards, you'll probably find a range somewhere from about 300 or 290 to 350 feet per second. And I would consider anything in the 320 to 350 range modern, like power equivalent. There's still bows coming out today in that range. So that's one factor of understanding how lethal the bow is, but the other component is how long is your draw length. So that's measured in inches from the edge of the riser or the burger button, the center point of the bow, back to your, as far as like the draw stop of the cam, how far it's rotating. So personally, I have a 29-inch draw, which is probably like 1 inch past average. I think 28 is, some bow manufacturers would say, like sort of your average draw length. A 60-pound bow, which is, most bows coming out today are 60 or 70 pounds in the compound realm. 60-pound bow at 28 inches is, even if this was a bow built 20 years ago, is going to be more than enough energy to take a deer. A lot of that also comes into like the arrow that you're shooting. So if you're shooting a really light arrow, it's going to reduce your basically like the kinetic energy on impact. Kinetic energy and momentum are two different things. Kinetic energy is a snapshot of the power of the arrow. Momentum is what's being transferred through into the target and beyond. So momentum and weight really go hand in hand, and having a heavier arrow is going to help you in that regard.
Okay. Very, very good info.
I was just going to say, if anyone wants to connect with me further on that, like on an individual level, like, hey, I'm looking at this bow at this length, I can help you dial in where you want to go. Okay.
And I put your email address a few times in the chat. I'll do that one more time. And then everyone, I'm going to send you a follow-up email later this afternoon, and it'll have Devin's email in there as well. So again, if you want to go in depth on anything, you can reach out to him that way too. All right, next question. You mentioned archery clubs are a great resource. Is there a one-stop shop for finding those in my area, or how do I find clubs around me?
That's a good question. I would probably like Google archery range near you. And then when you go to that range, there's probably going to be either someone there that you can ask, or maybe some signage, or, kind of like maintained by, for me, like the San Diego Archers. And that's just a community that takes care of the range and puts on the shoots and does a lot of that work for the community. So there are really a ton of ranges. And then the other thing is maybe Google like 3D archery shoot California, something like that. And you'll find that across the state throughout the year, sometimes in the summer less, but there are really awesome shoots. And some of these things are, you'll see targets. You can go shoot Bigfoot and Redding. You can shoot, there's like a 10,000 BC shoot where you can shoot a bunch of prehistoric T-Rexes. And these are like foam, realistic animals with scoring and like vitals. So you can have obviously your deer, bear, pig, antelope, elk, but then there's some of these fun shoots where you're shooting, like T-Rexes and Bigfoot and whatnot. So it's a lot of fun. Like, I recommend everyone to try it. It's pretty much like golf for archery or frisbee golf or whatever you want to call it. It's a ton of fun.
Okay. So super beginner question here from this person. They're admitting that they're a super beginner. You mentioned getting in tune with bow hunting, your environment and scent. What does being in tune with your scent mean?
Good question. Beyond just, not being a stinky person, I think the answer is like, if you're hunting, your scent is really going to play into how the animal is going to identify you. So certain animals more than others will be using their nose more than their eyes and ears to locate you and understand that you're a threat and to leave. With rifle hunting, that still is very much in play, but if you're 200-300 yards away, your scent isn't really going to have as much of an effect as if you're 20-30 yards away. So there's a ton of products out there to be scent free. There's a lot of
scent free is what we're going for. Like, don't
quote unquote scent free. I don't think that exists, but eliminating your scent.
No,
but,
like Dracar or anything.
Yeah. Personally, I'm just
kidding. I just dated myself.
I just try to play the wind, because there's always scent. Like, even, no matter what you do with your equipment, there's always scent. You walk into the tree stand and you start sweating, and like, so you want to understand, like, if you're hunting a specific spot or if you're moving through an area, what the wind is doing. You want that wind in your face, so that as you're moving, whatever animals are in the landscape, your scent is going to be going behind you. And so they're not going to be able to smell you. They're only going to be able to maybe see or hear you. So it's just one more variable that's going to allow you to get close. There's also things you can, if you're really interested in this, when you're sitting in a tree stand, understanding how the thermals work. So, as the land heats up, or the differential between the temperature of the ground and the air is going to either cause your scent to go up, or it's going to cause it to
Oh,
go down. And
yeah.
so those can really impact whether or not the animal is going to smell you.
Okay. Well, you gave some shout outs to your wife a few times, and I think you made maybe some other people jealous. Did you introduce her to archery, or was she a hunter before? They'd love to introduce their wife, but they're not for it. Do you have any tips for getting your spouse involved in your hunting adventures, your archery adventures, anything like that?
That's a great question. It was really cool. We actually got into it at the same time. She grew up in
Okay.
a family. Her dad was a big bow hunter, but she never hunted. I grew up abalone diving and spearfishing and fishing, but I never hunted as a kid. So it was a logical thing for me. Like, I loved shooting anything I can get my hands on, like bows, guns, whatever it was. I'm just like your average boy who wants to do those things. But um, I think that we ended up both getting into it at the same time because of Hurricane Sandy. We got stranded in Pennsylvania like 10 or 11 years ago, and we were at her mom's house, and we went through the basement and dug up some old bows and started shooting pumpkins, and it was like hooked ever since.
Oh, yeah.
But I would just say, I ended up buying her a bow, like $1,000 nice bow, which was kind of like here you go, like let's do this thing together. So that didn't hurt for anyone who's considering it. Like, maybe, I don't know if your wife's or significant other is like a jewelry person or whatnot, but I gave her the bow before I gave her the ring, and I don't know
Oh,
if
that's
that's part of the
awesome.
success, but yeah, I mean, get her something nice, maybe that she's going to enjoy, or let her try from a friend. Really, the most important thing: put an arm guard on when she's first shooting, so she doesn't hurt her hand. Because if she's holding it wrong and she slaps her arm, she's never going to do it again.
Right.
And make sure the draw length is right, and just let her shoot a really low weight draw weight bow. So it's not hard, it's fun, it's easy. And
Someone put in the chat, start with 3D shots too, and then possibly move to turkey hunting. Like, take
I
her out to
think,
shoot
yeah,
Bigfoot or the dinosaur.
exactly. Yeah, we do this with our daughter. Like, we love doing these shoots together. It's just, you're outside, you're in nature, you're walking around, you're shooting the equipment. That's beautiful. And it's a good way to spend time together, and you go to the
Right.
range together, and then
Getting
now
outside. Yeah.
we hunt together, and it's a blast.
Now, on this topic, you mentioned, to a lot of this is practice, like practice on different positions, locations. When you're practicing, would you recommend that people get their own target, or like go to these ranges frequently? Like, what's the best way to practice? You mentioned from a tree blind and from your knees, and like, how did you practice?
Yeah. So living in San Diego in a little apartment, like, couldn't shoot at my place, unfortunately. If you can shoot at home, yeah, make sure you do it safely, have a nice backstop and everything. But that's really awesome. I don't Certain cities have different regulations, but getting a target is fantastic. You can shoot a few arrows every night, you're going to improve so much. But for me, I just went to the range that's 20 minutes away, went to the local range and shot all the time, and met a lot of people. And archers are so nice in general. You'll get way
Right.
more opinions than you ever need. Everyone's going to tell you something different, but take it with a grain of salt, and learn something, try new things, figure out what works for you. But yeah, I would recommend starting at a range,
Okay.
local range near you, or a friend that has equipment, or just go to your bow shop. The bow shop, a lot of them are going to have a range 10, 20, 30 yards maybe. They're going to help make sure that you have the right bow, the right draw length. Almost every bow shop is going to, for free, allow you to test something. Really make sure that you have the right experience going forward. I saw West Coast Archery Shop commented there, like, if you're in, I think, Petaluma area, like, those guys, all these bow shops in the state, they want you to enjoy the sport. So
Right.
yeah, I think, go check out your local shop is a great way to start too.
Now, speaking of shops, is there, and this was a question that came in, is there any tips to making my trip to the bow shop less intimidating? As this was a female that wrote in, I always feel talked down to, even when I've educated myself before I go in. So any tips to navigating that?
Yeah, should have had my wife join me for this one. Okay, I think she could probably share some insight there. I mean, I would say, like, if that's the way you feel,
Maybe pick a different shop.
Maybe it's not the right shop because,
Yeah.
you know, there's a ton of really great shops. And from my experience, I worked in a bow shop for a time. And I've been to plenty, and some of them have a little bit more of that vibe, but I think the majority are not. And, you know, maybe it's just, you know, telling people exactly what you're looking for and just be direct and say, like, I want to test a bow. I am, or I'm not looking to buy, or whatever it might be. Just be upfront and say, you know, like, I'd like to get into hunting. I'd like to test out some bows, and just, you know, drive the conversation. And if you're still getting, like, you know, bad vibes, it's like, there's a ton of bow shops. So
Right.
maybe try a different one.
All right, and one more question that came in on the sights, on the multi-pin sight that you showed, where do you position your shot? Or how do you want all those pins lined up on the animal?
Great question. And that reminds me, I absolutely forgot a really critical point. And you know, guys, I'm sorry, like, there's so much to cover with archery that I probably glossed over and misspoke and didn't cover a ton of things. So, like, please feel free to reach out. And if I did miss anything, feel free to jump in and, like, comment, but it's hard in a short amount of time. But so your bow, on the string, there's a peep sight you see here. And that's actually a hole. So when you draw the bow back, you're gonna, with all your anchor points, you're gonna line up that peep sight with the main sight here with your pin. So you'll have a ring around your main sight and a ring around your peep, and you want those two to be exactly linked up. So the two circles, you want them to match up perfectly, kind of like your front and rear sight on a rifle if you're shooting iron sights, something like that. So then once you have the two rings exactly matched, then depending on your distance, you'll use the pin. So for me, that top pin is going to be 20 yards. So I would put that on the animal. Then I would, if it was 30 yards, I'd put the second pin, 40 yards, and so on and so forth. So the rings always match up. Your anchor points are always the same. And then wherever you're aiming for is going to be that pin as far as distance.
Got it. Okay. Now, one more came in. Sorry, I know I said that was the last one.
No,
Can you visually tell if a bow has been dry fired? Or you mentioned second opinion. Who should you ask for a second opinion on whether a used bow is good or not?
Yeah, you can tell. I mean,
Okay.
you can tell if a bow's been dry fired and damaged. Some bows get dry fired and they don't get damaged. Maybe it's a low draw weight when there just wasn't a ton of energy in the system and it didn't have, you know, sometimes they'll just pull the string off the cam. It's also possible to derail a bow by twisting the string and pulling it by your hand, and that will pop it off the track, so it looks like it was dry fired. You know, I would just recommend, one, to people who do get their bows, don't pull it back without an arrow. It's probably, you're probably going to dry fire it eventually, and it's going to be a hard lesson to learn. And don't trust your release, because sometimes those go off. So but yeah, I mean, you want to look at the limbs. I would have a professional, someone with experience, look at the bow, maybe take it to your bow shop.
Okay.
The bow shop's not going to sell you a bow that's unsafe. So, you know, check the limbs. You can take a cotton ball or a Q-tip and run them up and down all the limbs to see if there's any little micro cracks or delamination. That's a good trick. Take your arrow and line it on the cam and make sure that, or something, you know, a ruler, make sure that the cam is perfectly flush and that it's not bent. And then if you're buying a used bow, you should probably put new strings on it anyway, unless they just recently did that. So keep that in mind. That's going to cost you, you know, $100-200 probably to do. So you're already going to change the strings. That's not really that important. Yeah, and I realized I completely glossed over arrow rests, which is a hugely critical component of the bow as well. So for anyone that wants to talk about arrow rests, drop away versus fixed, whisker biscuit, there's a ton of different options there. Feel free to connect with me afterwards. It just an hour is not enough time.
I know. Well, people are hanging on. So we got another one too coming in. I always seem to hyperextend my elbow and smack my arm. I can't not do it. Any exercises or tips to getting out of this bad behavior?
Yeah. I'm going to answer that one. I just saw a good comment in the chat too that West Coast put in about axles. It's a great point. A lot of times you'll see the axles are bent when the bow's been dry fired, which you do oftentimes need to put in a bow press to see that. So again, taking it to a shop, having them pull the components out, check out the axle, check out the cams, all those inner workings. Sometimes you'll see spacers that are like broken. Those are all really good points. So thanks for throwing that in there.
If someone is, if you're possibly going to be purchasing a used bow, could you ask like the person selling it to meet you at your local shop or pro shop and have an expert go over it there?
I would also just expect,
okay.
I'd expect that, the pro shop may charge you a small amount because it's,
okay.
It's labor, like it's like taking it to a mechanic. You know what I mean? It's like buying a used car.
Okay.
They'll look under the hood for you and make sure everything looks good. But as far as hyperextending your elbow, the question was basically like, how do I stop hitting my elbow with the string?
Yes.
So that comes down to grip and form and potentially draw length. But if your draw length is too long, you're going to be like this and you're going to be twisted around and you're going to have to stick your arm out and it's probably going to hit the string. The other really important part is your grip. So if you're holding the bow like this and you're death gripping it, it's going to cause you to really lock your arm probably. And it's a good likelihood that you're going to nail your forearm. What you want to do is you want to have a more relaxed grip. You actually have let me take a stabilizer off so I can get this closer. So see how my knuckles come out at about a 45-degree here? So essentially, I'm not doing this to the bow. This brings my forearm really close. I'm bringing my knuckles out at a 45-degree. I'm really only holding on to the bow using like you see my hand's completely open. I'm only using the tension against the palm of my hand. The bow is sitting right here. It's a little bit hard to see, but you're really just between these two fingers. And then you want to just have a relaxed cradle for that bow to sit in, as opposed to just gripping it and holding on, because that one is going to cause you to torque the bow when you shoot. This way it's just going to shoot and the bow's just going to kind of fall forward a little bit.
That was a very good walkthrough. Thank you for that. All right. Well, we went a little bit over, but you guys kept asking questions, so it's not entirely Devin or I's fault.
Yeah, it's good questions.
Yeah. So our time together is up. If you didn't get your question answered, which I think I got through all of them, but again, I popped Devin's email in the chat. I will send you his email address later this afternoon. If you have any questions for myself or the R3 team, that's R3 statewide program at wildlife.ca.gov. That is also in the chat. Please consider joining us for our next few R3H3 sessions. We have one more in October, on October 29th. It's an introduction to teaching kids how to fish. And our final one for 2021 will be on November 12th, and it'll be a fun look at wild foods in the holidays. We're going to talk about using fish, game, and foraged items for holiday meals and more. Registration for both of those are on our R3 calendar now. You can also go to our social media, so make sure you give us a like or a follow, and you can find all of our events there. Again, this session was recorded and will be available on the R3 page in the coming days. A huge thank you to Devin for being here, and all of you, our huddlers, for taking the steps to educate yourselves and becoming the best hunters, anglers, foragers, and shooting sports enthusiasts that you can be. Have a great weekend, and we hope we can see you soon. Devin, thank you again. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you next time.
All right, I'm gonna go bow hunting. I hope you guys all do.
Yeah,
one day at least.
Hope everyone can get out and enjoy the outdoors this weekend, whether it be bow hunting or whatever.
Absolutely.
Thanks, guys.